My brother auctioned my cabin without asking me, then texted, "You can't afford it anyway." Seconds later, Mom replied, "Finally, it was a disgrace." I was sitting in an executive meeting when those words hit my screen. My hand went cold. That cabin was where I had slept on the floor, worked through winters, and built the first pieces of my life. Grant expected anger. Instead, I typed one word, "Sure." Then I put my phone face down and looked through the glass at the resort surrounding that cabin. What Grant didn't know was that his auction had reached the one person he never expected. By the time that meeting ended, I had approved a renovation budget larger than anything Grant had ever earned in his life. No one in my family knew that. To them, I was still Maria, the quiet daughter who wore simple blouses, drove an older pickup, and spent too many weekends at a weathered cabin on the California coast. They thought I worked as an architectural designer for a regional contractor. I never corrected them, not because I was ashamed of what I had built, but because years ago I learned something painful. They only asked questions when the answer could be compared to Grant. Grant was 39, polished, loud, and always performing success. He managed sales in the luxury auto business, wore expensive watches, and had a story ready for every Thanksgiving table. Dad loved that. Mom loved it even more. She could tell her friends what Grant drove, where he ate, and who he knew. With me. The conversation usually ended at my boots. "You're still wearing those," Mom once asked over Thanksgiving dinner, staring at the scuffed leather like it had offended her personally. Natalie, my younger sister, laughed into her wine. Grant smiled. "Maria likes the struggling artist look." Everyone moved on. I did too. What they never knew was that I had bought the cabin at 22 for about $220,000. The roof leaked. The porch groaned under my weight. In winter, the pine walls smelled damp, and I used to sit wrapped in an old blanket with gas station coffee, moving numbers around on a yellow legal pad until 2 in the morning. I worked drafting jobs. I helped on construction sites. I took evening work when I needed it. That cabin was where I learned how little sleep a person could survive on when rent, loan payments, and ambition were all due at once over the next 14 years. I bought land around it piece by piece. An empty parcel here, an aging motel there, a neglected commercial lot nobody wanted. Eventually, those scattered pieces became a coastal resort business worth around $1 billion. I became its CEO, but I never transferred the cabin into the business. I kept that land in my own name. Everything else represented what I had built. The cabin represented what I had survived. That afternoon, I opened the family chat again. Grant had sent another message. "Buyers at $650,000. I'll take a fair commission for handling it." I read it twice. Then I noticed one detail that changed everything. He already had a buyer. I called Grant. He answered on the second ring. "Finally," he said. "I was starting to think you'd make this difficult. Who is the buyer?" "A private real estate investment group. Serious people. They offered $650,000. And you accepted that I negotiated it." His voice carried that familiar smile I had heard since we were teenagers. I kept mine flat. "What exactly did you sign?" Grant sighed. "Maria, please don't turn this into one of your emotional attachment speeches. I'm helping you." Then he told me about an authorization I had signed years earlier when I was away on a long project. It allowed him to receive important mail, handle routine payments, and take care of household bills while I was gone. Nothing more. "Did you actually read what I signed?" I asked. "A signature is a signature?" "No, Grant. It isn't." He laughed. That sound bothered me more than the words. "You design things. Maria, I negotiate. Let me do what I'm good at." I closed my eyes. For a second, I was back at Thanksgiving 8 years earlier, trying to tell my family I had cleared almost $50,000 on my first serious renovation project. Dad interrupted me halfway through because Grant had gotten promoted. Mom opened champagne. Grant raised his glass. Nobody ever asked me to finish my story. My phone buzzed again. "Mom," I answered. "Please don't embarrass your brother tomorrow," she said immediately. "Grant understands business. You get too attached to things." I stared through the window at the cabin below. "Mom." He tried to sell my property. He is trying to save you from yourself. There it was. Not concern, not confusion. Certainty. They truly believed I needed permission to control my own life. An hour later, the situation got worse. A surveyor representing the buyer arrived at the resort and tried to access the cabin parcel. Security refused entry. Private land, no verified authorization. The buyer demanded an explanation. Grant called me again. Furious, but somewhere during that call, his panic turned into excitement. "If the resort cares this much about that parcel," he said, "they'll pay more." "How much more?" "Over $1 million. I almost laughed. Instead, I listened. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm going to show those people what a real negotiation looks like." That night, I sat on the cabin porch, listening to the ocean beyond the dark cliffs. For 14 years, my family had mistaken my silence for weakness. Tomorrow, I decided to let Grant find out what it really meant. The next morning, I was in my office before sunrise. I had barely touched my coffee when Daniel, our legal counsel, walked in carrying a thin stack of property records. Lucas, the resort manager, followed him and closed the door. Daniel sat across from me. "Maria, the cabin is still entirely yours. The authorization Grant is relying on never gave him the right to market or sell the property." I nodded. "And the buyer?" "They put about $50,000 into escrow, but the deal is still subject to ownership and authority verification. Nothing has closed. That mattered. No one had lost the land. Not yet." Daniel asked what I wanted him to do. For a moment, I pictured Grant's face at Thanksgiving, Mom's champagne glass, Dad cutting me off mid-sentence. 14 years of being treated like the least capable person at every table. The anger came fast, then I let it pass. "Protect the property," I said. "Tell the truth. Nothing more." Daniel studied me for a second, then nodded. He contacted the buyer first. Their representatives were informed that Grant had no verified authority to complete the sale and that the transaction could not move forward until the ownership issue was resolved. Then Daniel called my brother. I was not on the call, but Daniel briefed me immediately afterward. Grant had answered confidently. Apparently, he thought the resort was finally ready to negotiate. Daniel asked who had authorized the auction. Grant said I had. Daniel asked what authority he was relying on. Grant mentioned the old paperwork. Then, according to Daniel, Grant started bragging about the buyer and how the resort could avoid future complications by paying more than $1 million for my land. Daniel let him finish. Then he asked one question. "Sir, why are you auctioning our billionaire CEO's private land?" Grant went silent. Daniel said the silence lasted long enough that he thought the call had dropped. Finally, Grant whispered, "Your what?" Daniel did not explain. He simply told Grant to bring every authorization, payment record, an agreement he had relied on to a meeting at the resort the next afternoon. Less than 5 minutes later, my personal phone rang. Grant's name filled the screen. I answered. For the first time in my life, my brother did not sound superior. He sounded scared. "Maria," he said slowly. "Who exactly do you work for?" "By 1:45 the next afternoon." Grant was pacing beside the resort's marble lobby windows, checking his watch every few seconds. He wore a navy suit, polished shoes, and the expression of a man trying to convince himself he still had control. When he saw me walk in wearing dark jeans, a cream blouse, and leather boots, his jaw tightened. "You came like that, Maria. This is a serious meeting. Let me do the talking." A bellman passing behind him smiled at me. "Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett." Grant barely noticed. He was too busy straightening his cuffs. Daniel met us at the executive elevator. "Mr. Bennett, before we begin, this meeting will be recorded for corporate records. Everyone will be asked to consent." Grant nodded. "Fine, I want everything on record." Inside the conference room, floor-to-ceiling glass framed the coastline. From where Grant sat, the cabin looked tiny below us, surrounded by villas, pools, and landscaped paths. He opened his folder. "For the record, my sister owns that. Personally, she authorized me to handle matters on her behalf. I secured a buyer at $650,000. But given the resort's dependence on this parcel, I'm prepared to resolve this today for a little over $1 million. Daniel folded his hands. Who authorized you to auction the property? Maria did. When Grant slid the old authorization across the table, Daniel read it. This allowed you to receive mail, make routine payments, and handle household bills while your sister was away. It gave me authority. It gave you limited authority. Grant's neck reddened. She knew what I was doing. She texted me back. He turned toward me. You said sure. Every eye shifted to me. I said one word. I never gave you authority to sell my land. Grant stared at me, then back at Daniel. Fine, then fix the paperwork. The point is, the resort needs this parcel. Lucas finally spoke. Why do you believe that Grant laughed? Because it's sitting in the middle of your billion-dollar development. Obviously you want it. Daniel leaned back. And who do you think decides whether this resort buys land? The CEO? The board? Whoever actually runs this place? Lucas looked at me. Maria. Would you like to answer that? Grant followed his eyes. I stood, walked around the table, and took the chair at the head. Grant's face changed before I said a word. Small pieces connecting too late. You've been trying to negotiate with me? He blinked. What, I'm the CEO? Grant. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I developed this resort. I control the business around that cabin. The portfolio is worth about $1 billion. He looked through the glass, then back at me. But you live there? Yes. You drive that old truck? Yes. You told us you worked in design. I do. I also built this. His voice dropped. Why didn't you tell us? That question hurt more than I expected. You never asked. Grant looked down. For the first time, the salesman disappeared. I needed the commission. He said quietly, I'm behind on bills. I put money down on a car I shouldn't have bought. Then he looked at me. I just wanted to prove I knew better than you. There it was. Not business, not help, pride. Daniel explained that the buyer would be notified formally. The transaction would not proceed, and Grant could face financial claims depending on the costs his actions had caused. Grant turned to me. You can make this go away. I shook my head. I can protect my property. I can tell the truth. I'm not paying to erase your choices. His face tightened. You'd really let your own brother face this? I held his gaze. I'm not doing this to you, Grant. I'm just not stopping the consequences anymore. Grant called our parents before he even left the resort. By 4 that afternoon, Claire told me 3 people were downstairs demanding to see me. Mom, Dad, Natalie. I let them come up. Dad entered first, angry enough that his face had gone red. Maria, what did you do to your brother? I stayed behind my desk. What did Grant tell you? That you trapped him. That your lawyers are trying to ruin him over a misunderstanding. Mom stepped forward. He made a mistake. You have money. Fix it. Then she finally looked around, not glanced. Looked. The architectural models, the operating plans spread across my desk, the coastline filling the windows behind me, staff moving quietly outside the glass doors. Her eyes landed on the nameplate near my computer. Maria Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. Dad saw it too. His anger weakened. Is this actually your office? Yes. Natalie covered her mouth. Mom whispered, You own all this. I built it. Dad lowered himself into a chair. For years, I had imagined that moment. I thought seeing shock on their faces would feel like revenge. It didn't. It just felt sad. Dad looked at me for a long time. Why didn't you tell us I folded my hands? I didn't hide it. You decided what I was before you ever asked. No one answered. Then Mom recovered enough to return to Grant. He is still your brother. I know. He could lose everything. He made promises he had no authority to make. You can afford to help him. There it was again. Not. Is he sorry? Not. What did he do to you? Just, what can Maria pay? Dad leaned forward. Family helps family. I almost smiled. Do you remember when you two were struggling with medical bills and housing payments a few years ago? Oh, Dad froze. Mom's expression changed. Someone covered about $60,000. I continued. You never knew who. Natalie looked from them to me. Mom whispered, That was you, yes. Dad stared at the floor. I remembered the Christmas dinner that came a few weeks afterward. Grant had joked that I probably spent all my money on tools and coffee. Dad laughed. I had laughed too. Mom's eyes filled. Maria, I'm sorry. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still did, so I asked the question I had been avoiding for years. Are you sorry because of what you did to me, or because you finally know what I'm worth on paper? Mom opened her mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered more than any apology could. I told them I would still help with real medical needs and genuine emergencies, but I would not finance Grant's debts. I would not pay for luxury expenses. And I would not let anyone in the family make decisions in my name again. 6 months later, the cabin was still mine. The auction was canceled. The buyer's dispute was resolved through attorneys. Grant had to cover the costs he was responsible for and work out a repayment plan. He gave up the sports car and cut back hard on the lifestyle he had been pretending he could afford. I didn't call his employer. I didn't interfere with his career. Whatever happened next would come from his own choices. Natalie eventually sent me a message. No excuses, no request for money, just an apology. I answered her. Not because everything was fixed, because healing and access are two different things. One evening, I sat on the cabin porch with coffee warming my hands while the resort lights came on across the property. For years, silence had meant being ignored. That night, it finally meant peace. I used to think revenge meant making someone hurt the way they hurt you. I was wrong. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop rescuing people from consequences they created themselves. Family should never mean surrendering your boundaries, your voice, or your right to choose your own life. That old cabin still stands where it always has. And now, when I look at it, I don't see struggle. I see proof that I survived. If you've ever had to protect your peace from someone you loved, share your story below and subscribe for more stories like this.